What we see is not only determined by the location and the time, but also the perspective. And like every perspective, there is at least 360 degrees. It's actually much bigger because it's a spherical perspective. And the perspective that I'm finding most meaningful to explore is the paradigm of the unlovable self. It's not very complicated. The unlovable self is the self that no one can or does love. It is the self that is deemed by itself in the internalized wound as unlovable. Now, what do I mean by this? If you're in an environment where every single person sees your cruelty and no one sees your kindness, in a matter of time, the fact that in order to survive in a world in which one is a minute part, one must attune to the vast majority. In other words, you might be the most lovable and the most amazing person on the planet or on multiple planets. But if not a single person sees that, if not a single person loves you, and you are instead subjected to 10,000 repetitions of invisibility, shame, avoidance, discounting, we don't want you, etc. This is not being loved. This is not being included. This is not feeling safe. This is not feeling secure. This is not feeling loved and belonged. This is not feeling self-esteem. This is not feeling self-actualized. This is exclusion. Go away. We don't want you. We don't see you. We don't love you. Now, within the 360 degree and really the much bigger dimension of the psyche, there are a good chunk of that terrain that the culture, systematically disowns, systematically avoids, systematically silences, systematically hates, systematically is disgusted by, systematically disowns, systematically does not invite, systematically doesn't love, doesn't welcome, doesn't cherish, does not honor within itself, because cultures are simply a human construction to relate to the self, to the psyche, the probability field, the possibility field that we all share, the actual field that we all share. Now, when one is permeated in an environment in which parts of ourselves are not loved, and we must attune to that environment culturally in order to survive, feel secure, feel some sense of love and belonging. Meaning the contract with the cult is, I will not behave this way, I will behave this way, I will not think this way, I will think this way, I will not do this, I will do this, and then you can belong, then you can feel secure here. The remainder, the excluded part of the psyche, is the unlovable self. Now, cults, by their very nature, are narrow, box-like, unintelligent, reduced to the lowest common denominator, unconscious, ignorant, unscientific, absurdly inefficient, but they do provide the stability of cohesion. That's the trade-off. Now, the more traumatized the population, the more this stability is valued over intelligence, diversity, complexity, etc. If you are highly insecure because you've been raped and then shamed for that, and then you've cried and been shamed for the tears, and then you've been insecure and have been shamed for that insecurity, and you enter a new social dimension. And you get to decide, of course, right? You're just this completely neutral, free person who gets to decide what they're going to talk about when someone says, well, tell me all about you. You go to a new school, etc., to escape the shame. Now, what are you really escaping, by the way? We're escaping the shame of a cult that is so ignorant and insensitive that it facilitates rape and then punishes the rape survivor. The shame is the cult that will facilitate that level of stupidity, that level of unkindness. So when we say you're escaping the shame, the cult, of course, transfers, every cowardly cult does, transfers this shame onto the individual, the one person who shouldn't have to carry the shame of that cult. That individual deals with the shame of the cult. The shame that the cult is trying to give to the individual by not doing anything about it, by not owning it. I mean, this is a big deal. And when a big deal is honored and owned, a school gathering is called, all the parents are got together, and leaders speak. We have let this individual down. We are letting ourselves down. We have let the perpetrator down. We are not paying attention. We are not doing our job. And things need to change. We need to develop more emotional literacy. We need to be able to detect. We need to be gathering metadata for people that are getting bullied because we're not doing our job there either. We need a metadata platform where any student can communicate clusters of information so that when we start seeing 300 lines all ending up in these 5 people. This is where the drugs are being distributed. This is where the abuse is occurring. This is where the bullying is occurring. You have 300 lines all pointing to 5 people in metadata. Metadata being necessary when adults are not doing their job to protect the students. Then the cult is owning its own shame. But when nothing is done, and an individual is bearing an extraordinary concentration of the abuse within the entire culture, and it's being minimized and deflected and ignored and avoided, by ignoring that person, avoiding that person, not making a big deal when no one's screaming about it, that's when the shame gets transferred from an incompetent school, an incompetent parent body, an incompetent government, an incompetent cult, onto the person who cannot escape the pain. So when that individual moves to a new school to protect the ugliness of an inconsiderate and unattuned cult, to make a new start so that the existing system and protocol can stay unacted on, the person can, of course, lead with the wound and start the process over again of being excluded and avoided and whispered about and this and that in a cult that does not know its responsibilities. Or they can wear the latest sneakers. They can put on a showery smile. They can do the exact opposite and look normal. They can try and fit in and have the winning look and avoid all mention of negative feelings, etc., and do what this cult likes, put on a surface show. The unlovable self is the part that is not getting talked to. The unlovable self is the part that's being hidden within this framework, in which it is understood by the unlovable self through the matter-of-factness of day-to-day experience that to be out there is to be unloved. And so we have to add a new layer of internal collusion with the inadequacy of the cult out there. We have to add a new layer by hiding the parts that the cult does not have the maturity and the wisdom to love and respond to. By hiding that. And when the self participates in the secret, now we have the unlovable self. So this is the terrain. And to heal the unlovable self is not hard. It is not complicated. It just requires maturity and intelligence. To heal the unlovable self from a leadership position is simple. First of all, you own the issue. Second of all, you talk about it as yours. I have these parts, these parts, these parts, these parts, and these parts that do not fit into the acceptable definition. I've been drunk in this situation. I molested this person in this situation. I ran a red light when I wasn't paying attention. I speed 10% of the time. I cheat on the mileage of my vehicles with this car, on my taxes. I often watch porn rather than do my job. I have these fantasies that don't fit into the status quo. I don't know the answer to this and this information, and that makes me look like an idiot. I'm not feeling good or happy about this. And this is all me as the leader. I'm owning the unlovable self. Next, I'm showing kindness. Please be kind to this part in me, and please follow me and let me be kind to you. And it is our job as a community to respond to the unlovable self, that which is taboo and unspoken. It's our job to respond to that, to understand it, to learn from it, to change environments, to understand what's going on. If I'm drinking too much, what's the pain that is not getting dealt with in this community? If I'm speeding, what's the absurd things we're doing in this community that make it seem like there's not enough time when we're sitting around watching TV, hours every day? We respond, we understand the pattern. And we invite the unlovable self out of those around us. And we honor it, and we honor it, and we honor it, and we honor it, and we own it. Now suddenly there is no unlovable self. That bit is no longer in the domain beyond the wall. It's now, the wall has been expanded, and this part is now inside the domain. We've reclaimed the territory of the psyche from the unlovable shadow into the lovable domain of understanding, of caring, of leadership, of responsibility. And it only takes one person to move the unlovable self into the domain of the lovable self. Because it takes a lot of work to convince an infant that parts of them are not lovable. It takes a lot of work. Shaming, raging, violence, intimidation, guilt-tripping, threatening hell, religious condemnation, punishment. It takes an enormous amount of sustained abuse to convince a child that parts of them are unlovable. And as soon as someone opens up and lets the doorway in to say, oh, that's like me, and I understand you. There's nothing wrong with feeling hatred to someone who terrified you and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I understand this, and I understand we can piece it together. It moves into this dance of ecological understanding, how the abuser becomes the victim, how the victim becomes the abuser, how patterns continue that are not healthy, just like the flu passing from one person to another, how violence spreads. We see the pattern, and we can respond with the medicine of consciousness, the medicine of awareness. And the unlovable self can emerge in its role as a healthy readout of what's going on. And we can emerge as healthy leaders in how we respond.